Welcome, colleagues, to this video sequence all around evidence in action. My name is Tammy. I am pronouns she, her, and I am director of the Derby Research School. And we are taking a little foray into this idea of plucking out a recommendation from one of the guidance reports relating to literacy, and and basically showing you a lived experience of it, that kind of walkthrough of a real teaching sequence, the thinking that went behind it, some of the examples of the activities and the resources that I used, and the outputs that supported. So really the kind of metacognition of me as a practitioner exemplifying this key recommendation. So what I was wrestling with when I was thinking about this is I think this idea of sustained writing and stamina for writing is a challenge currently in our space, particularly post-pandemic. So this is something that is not new, because I'm going to go back to my own teaching experience when I was working with pupils in year 2. And I am drawing from the KS2 Guidance Report, but the principles around structuring writing and planning and sequencing teaching to support writing was really, really fundamental at that stage. So I'll tell you a little bit about the context of the class. I was a year 6 teacher in a city Birmingham school, and I was asked to go and work in year 2. We had a cohort with a mixture of presentations and challenges, quite a number of pupils with EHCPs in the class, quite a range of complex needs, and a real diverse range of start points. They'd also had some disruption, because in this very incident we'd actually had a ceiling collapse in that classroom, and they had to be located as a class. So they'd had significant disruption, and pupils who needed stability and continuity were then uprooted from their classroom environment, and they then had a change of teacher, which is why then it was like, look, will you go into year 2 and support? And this is my first time teaching in year 2, and from my experience, you know, the kids were amazing, and I think this year of my teaching was, amongst a number of years for different reasons, this was a huge developmental phase for me, because those pupils taught me so much about really living some of the principles that we're going to talk about, and really having to nail some of these practices really well to create the stepping stones towards confidence in writing. It was a really fabulous year, difficult and challenging, but what I got from it in terms of my development of my teacher practice, but also the outputs from the pupils and the impact on the pupils, that reciprocal kind of iterative learning cycle for me as a practitioner was phenomenal. So let's just go to the evidence base first, and then we'll look at the practical examples. So in terms of evidence into action, a really good starting point if you're focusing on any of the themes here, we're talking about writing, but it could be oracy, oral language development, it could be reading development. It's really good to actually stack all of the 4 guidance reports from the Preparing for Literacy, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 and Secondary, and actually get that sense of progression from start points up to secondary. And this is where, you know, in this instance, I'm pulling out the writing ones. The early years around developing children's capability and motivation to write. That's a core sort of bedrock principle. And if I'm honest, it was where I started with this year 2 class, really thinking what's going to hook them in, what's going to capture them and motivate them to write. Definitely this idea that writing is physically and intellectually demanding, I really had to acknowledge that as much because of the variety of start points. And I did actually have a pupil in this class with emergent writing. She was still kind of shape making with her graphemes, and we were really working hard with her on developing writing and writing for a purpose and an audience, and her language, her vocabulary and all these things, whilst also working on her transcription skills. So that was a real big thing for me. And this idea of expressive language underpinning it, you'll see in the sequence where we look at like making sure that expressive language and enacting language and oral language skills are a bedrock for the writing experience. Then from that, then we go into the key stage one about teaching pupils to use strategies for planning and monitoring their writing. This is definitely a big part of it. We chunked everything down, and this idea of taking things apart. This is when we have the pre-writing activities, drafting, editing, revising, and sharing. I'm going to actually use the Key Stage 2 framework just to exemplify that today, but these two are very, very much aligned as concepts of chunking down the writing process to break it down for pupils. And definitely strong modelling and structured support are features of it. Then this is where you get to the kind of more formal 5-stage steps of teaching writing composition, where the pre-writing becomes more planning. I would say the pre-writing activities is something we really focused in on. Drafting, editing, revising, really teasing those apart, which we're going to look at, and publishing or sharing, depending on your choice of language. So we definitely thought about that. And developing pupils' transcription and sentence construction. You'll see we do 3 cycles of this to build sentence construction through to paragraph level, through to text level. And then obviously the secondary, kind of, you're trying to hinge towards secondary around breaking down complex writing tasks. So for me as a practitioner, this is a really good way of taking each of the developmental steps and seeing, where am I coming from, where am I going to, and really seeing those kind of building blocks towards writing skill. I'm going to home in for a second on this idea of writing is physically and intellectually demanding. One of the key visuals I think is really, really important in the guidance reports is this simple view of writing. And when I think of the pupils that were in my class, this is a real, a fabulous way of breaking down why writing was so difficult, why that load was really challenging. So this takes this idea of the simple view of writing, takes this idea that the act of writing is demanding, because you've actually got 3 domains of challenge. In the first instance, you've got text generation. You've got to think of what they're writing. They think of that, they're going to understand their purpose for writing and write to that genre or audience, and really think about how they are building their ideas together, their words, and building sentences, that kind of what we would have maybe called more that kind of not just the text construction but the composition of it, and really thinking about, what am I going to do to enable this? Concurrently, in order to get that down on the page, there are 2 other domains that are really, really powerful. First, they're transcription skills. And we all know and feel this. And I definitely, when I was working with this class, the physical act of spelling and handwriting, I talked about people, there was a number of people who were really, really struggling still with letter sizing, alignment on the page in terms of writing on the line, and fluency of spelling. So I'm going to just take that as a given, that's something we progressively worked on throughout the year, discreetly building up through the handwriting lessons, explicitly building. Some of them were all in different stages in terms of phonics, but we did a lot of work of translating the phonics for reading into being able to segment for their spellings, and as a result being able to match graphemes and working on high frequency words and things like that were not phonically plausible. All the kind of was there, etc., that they needed to pick up to help them build fluency, so they weren't sort of stumbling over every single word and trying to break it down and trying to segment it in order to spell it, really doing that. So that's a wider piece that wrapped around this journey for the class. And then, so they've got to have ideas, they've got to be able to physically put those ideas and make the squiggles on the page make sense to translate those ideas. But they've also got to kind of plan, monitor, and review or evaluate their writing to purpose. Is this making sense? Is this accurate? Is it sequenced well? Is this going to engage the reader? And kind of, do I need to edit it? Do I need to build on it? They needed to be able to do that. And what I found is that the pupils would maybe focus on one of those things because we were really, really drilling, really, really focusing on it, and needed to iteratively build up their skills in all of these areas and build up their fluency and competency in these areas progressively every unit and work towards a large output. So, and that's where, you know, this is really, really powerful, because pupils, when writing, coordinate the processes in their working memory. And that load, if they're not fluent in some of these areas, then it creates a real challenge. We know that working memory has a limited capacity, so many children find this challenging. It becomes an overload. So this is why we really focused on in this teaching sequence, that with extensive practice, explicit instruction, and encouragement, pupils can become more adept at using these three overarching elements of writing. Coordinating them in working memory can become less effortful. And that I'm going to show you a kind of 3 rhythm cycle that we've done. This was over half a term that we worked in the way that we did, and we really thought carefully about how do we chunk this down, and I'll show you the teaching sequence. If you are interested in using that framework to think about the challenge for our pupils, we've got a little visual on screen that just gets you to think about, you know, the reflections on what pupils need in each of those 3 areas, and therefore breaking down into what am I going to do in my teaching sequence. So hopefully a little useful tool. So with that then, the actual guidance report, basically, for when you look at the section on Key Stage 2 on teaching writing composition, starts with a beautiful vignette of Miss Howarth. And I kind of felt like I was in a similar place to Miss Howarth. She's been asked to encourage her Year 3 children to produce further examples of extended writing. She's keen to reflect her commitment to achieving this quickly and would like to demonstrate that the children are producing longer pieces of writing by the time of a review planned by the senior leadership team. I can tell you that when I was asked to go and teach that class from the end of the autumn term, bearing in mind we're having a teacher leave and they were disrupted, this was my journey of like, I need to be able to demonstrate quite quickly how I am working with these pupils to make progress, because we had obviously in end of Key Stage 1 timelines in Year 2. So I kind of resonate with this vignette, and I'm sure that many of us as practitioners have that. I need to have shown progress by yesterday, because these kids really deserve me to help them with that. So in this example, to achieve this, she sets up a timetable which includes 2 sessions a week for longer writing. So she's not right, these are the times we're going to do longer writing. After some weeks of following the new timetable, Ms. Howard is considering how to better support the children to engage more positively with the written tasks, because the idea of in this time we are writing longer does not necessarily mean you're going to get an output. Many of them are struggling. Indeed, some parents have discussed real anxiety for their child when coming to school on the day's timetable for longer pieces of writing. I related to this because various reactions I'd get in the room when we were trying to attempt different kinds of writing, and this idea that in order to get to an extended piece, we just do it, we do the longer writing, just wasn't going to flow with this class and with what the pupils really needed to help them towards that. So we really need to think about how we make written tasks more accessible. And that was very much my challenge, with a mixed starting points of pupils, beautiful, amazing pupils that needed to be inspired, that needed to have things broken down, and sequentially building all the building blocks to help them thrive. To develop pupils' ability to write at greater length, it can be helpful if thinking of writing as a task made up of 5 stages: plan, draft, revise, edit, and publish. Children can be taught through modelling and scaffolding. Yes, we modelled and scaffolded hugely. Strategies to support them to undertake each of these stages in the writing process. So this is the kind of definitions that the EEF use around the plan, draft, revise, edit, publish. There are 2 things I would like to draw your attention to this. The planning being really important and separate from drafting. I think that's quite normal, but really focusing in on planning as not just creating the structure, but also generating ideas, setting goals, gathering information. That is really proactive, and we really embrace the proactive nature of the planning stage. Drafting, setting out a structure, getting an idea, that was really important. Then creating the space to revise versus edit. Now, this is something that was really new to me. So revising is making changes in light of feedback and self-evaluation. This is and when you look at edit, make changes to ensure writing is accurate and coherent, checking spelling and grammar. I often find, and I was saying for a large chunks of my career, I've sort of seen revising and editing as synonymous. And actually, taking them apart and saying, right, revising is the composition, going back to that kind of working memory, is the composition of this, the language choice, of how you're engaging in the audience for the purpose of writing, bang on, is it where you want it to be, is it conveying your ideas? And then editing is then going to the transcription area. So if you think about that triangle, like revising is in the top part of that triangle, editing then is about checking spelling and grammar, and writing is accurate. So it's really teasing out those two steps. So rather than bulking them together and loading two areas, we're really thinking explicitly about it. And publishing, presenting the work for the target audience to read. So, and this I think is something that's missed. We think as an output, it's in your book, I mark it, and actually celebrating it to the true purpose of writing is really important. And we thought carefully about this as well. So let's get into the lived example. So I had started with Naughty Bus. Actually, when you read the book, there is some lovely language in there, but it's not hugely textual. As in, like, when you go through it, it's got sentences on each page. So actually the start point seems really, really simple. And actually, that's what I wanted. I wanted a really visual, vibrant, accessible text that was fun and engaging, that modelled some really fun language choices. Not because that was the end output I wanted for the pupils, because we built towards that, but I just wanted them to be hooked into a genre. And we thought about writing, I wanted them to write a narrative in a modern setting. So we chose a book that was a narrative in a modern setting, but with a multi-part adventure story, because I actually thought there was a lot of capability, and I'll show you a bit, to extend it and to make it shorter depending on the people's start points, and really thinking a multi-part adventure. So we kind of went out of that story mounting structure of a beginning, the build-up, the problem, the resolution, and the ending. We kind of went out of that story narrative because I felt we were ready for a multi-part adventure in this situation, but I felt this gave me more breadth to extend or contract based upon the starting points. So we really enjoyed the text. First of all, we just embraced enjoying the text, hot seating the character, acting him out, enjoying the book, and really loving the text. We built that from that start point, and this was a boy heavy class as well, so this hooked them in. They loved the images, they loved the kind of visual element of it, and they thought it was fun and engaging, and we would reread it quite a lot. So this was then the thinking around the sequence. So we read and immersed in the text, lots of oral rehearsal. We did sentence level work and short paragraph level outputs to develop that language and sentence structure. And in each of these, we did plan, draft, revise, edit, publish, each of these, and we'll look at that. So that was one teaching sequence that was all about the kind of fundamentals, what I call the fragments. How did we look at those fragments? We then went into co-constructing a full adventure, this multi-part adventure, and that's why we chose this, because we chose it really carefully, because we could do the creative activity that I'm going to show you in a minute, where we got them to mini write at paragraph level a little adventure, because Naughty Bus came to our school and appeared one morning. So all of the class broke up into groups, they took him on a little adventure, and they wrote about that little adventure. So we all had little parts of it. So these are from the fragments going into a part. And we had lots of parts, and then we built that together, and I glued the parts together to make a story for our class. And again, they planned, drafted, revised, edited, and published their parts of that. Then we went to the whole. So this is towards the end of a 6-week teaching cycle, where we then got them to write their individual mini adventures, where they actually wrote their extended story, beginning, multi-part adventure, and end. And where they were sequencing paragraphs for that cohesive story and really writing to entertain. And quite frankly, how can a story about Naughty Bus and his terrible adventures coming to your own school not be entertaining? So let's just break that down. So these are the kind of micro teaching where we had 3 sequences. The first one was very much the fragment where we did a list poem. We did a hot seat of and interviewed Naughty Bus, and we acted out Naughty Bus, and we did a character description and some other bits. And this is where we really focused on sentence level construction and fragments of sentences. We then went into the part where we did some enacting, and that's the bit we're going to walk through together. And then we go into the final whole right, and I'll show you some examples of that. So I'm just going to walk you through very quickly what the fragment part looked like, this kind of micro teaching at fragment level, and then we're going to really focus on the kind of writing at paragraph level. In this example, we really focused on, we started to write a list poem because we wanted to build the language. And we just did a little kind of sensory experience of what we do see, hear, smell and feel on the bus. We really thought about kind of getting that oracy and oral language development through it, and vocabulary development. And then we wrote kind of sentences that built up through, and then we made a list poem. And what was really exciting is this, back in the day, we had the Power of Poetry publications, and we submitted them, and quite a number of them were physically published, which is really fun. If you can get, like, literally buy books with your poem in them. Really exciting example. But this is a very small, it's a fragment level of a micro teach at that kind of sentence construction level of really enriching language and having a purposeful kind of plan and draft, revise, edit, publish. And it was that way of really familiarizing them with this process that we kept on coming back to. In terms of the character description, we were talking all about Naughty Bus, that if we were going to describe Naughty Bus for someone who had never read the story, I will contextualize, this is when we were more doing the differentiation approach. But I would still say thinking about different start points for pupils. We've moved away from this now, but the example I have is back at that point in teaching. So this is where all my pupils I was conceptualizing would use adjectives to describe him really well. Most would open with a question, and some would paragraph our writing to set it out neatly. In this instance, I really thought about what outputs I was thinking about, and this is an example of it. And this is one of my pupils that is actually featured in Teaching Grammar Effectively in Primary Schools publication. It was a case study of it. But hopefully you can see kind of that work we'd done on writing the list poem in that sentence level construction now filtering into this. So he's got Naughty Bus looks like a normal toy bus. He has shiny dark black wheels, and he is brave because he does adventures by himself. He looks bright red all over, plus he is cheeky because he drives across the people. Also, he is powerful because he zooms. We did lots of work on powerful verb choices. He zooms across people. Naughty Bus has shiny blue window. Also, Naughty Bus is smiley because he is cheeky. And we're starting to build. We've got an idea of our composition. We've got ideas to write, and we're starting to now thinking about that language choices. It's a developmental point. So you can kind of see at this point where we're building the elements. What was really interesting is I had at the back of the classroom, this was an automatic independent task that was just there throughout the year that they could do at any point. They could take a blank sheet where they would describe their favourite moment in the text or in a text that they had. And it gave you an opportunity to draw it and write about it. And this was just an instant access, easily accessible text. But what was really nice is I could see in the independent choice work that was done, during either as a follow-on or just doing, they used to have sort of like a golden time where they could self-access materials. This particular pupil chose to draw the Naughty Bus image and talk about that his favourite part is when Naughty Bus travels through the red hardish beans with a brown sausage. It's still clunky in its composition, but it's lovely that this pupil is starting to develop that language and develop that extending the vocabulary. So these are my building blocks that we wanted to create in that first sort of section of really thinking, doing those micro teach of plan, draft, revise, edit, publish sequences in small amounts, sentence level, short paragraph level. We then got a very, very big adventure that we were about to go on, because one morning, Naughty Bus appeared in one of the school bags in our classroom. And so the Naughty Bus came to our school, adventure started. So this was really, really fun because we had a physical bus that we could take around the school and do all kinds of things. So in that planning stage, we broke the pupils up into groups, and each group chose a location. And they had to then agree what havoc that Naughty Bus was going to wreak in that area. We took audio recorders, we took photographs, and it was myself and TAs, we scribed exactly what they're writing, and I then pulled this together into a kind of short notes stage for them, where we used the pictures, we captured their language, and for some of our groups, they could re-listen over the audio for us. So it was in location, acting, planning out that part of it. So first group took it to Mrs. Goodman's office, drove across her keyboards and spoilt all the typing, smashed into her computer. Mrs. Goodman was not happy. At this stage, we're just looking at getting ideas and fun ideas and then living it out and doing that. So you can see the different groups. We have another group that went outside to the bunny rabbits, and another group went into the kitchen and the canteen, and the havoc that he wreaked there. He zoomed into the dinner hall, pushed all the chairs off the tables, splashed and jumped through a puddle of water, because I think we had he was mopping at the time, our lovely chef, crashed and knocked over the wet floor sign. Naughty Bus definitely came to school that day. So that was our planning stage. When it came to drafting, I think it's really interesting that when I look at the KS2 Guidance Report, there was a real alignment with the WISE Multi-Academy Trust case study that features in the KS2 Guidance Report. This idea of pre-writing activities, which supports oracy, vocabulary and oracy development, and then building into identifying key text features and teacher modelling and shared writing as a part of this sort of modelling process. So when we went from the plan to the drafting stage of this, I was really, really, really thinking, how do I build from their pre-writing activities and that vocabulary and oracy development through to at that kind of paragraph level, how I can really model and create the shared writing around it. So at that point then, when it came to drafting, we actually then started to, I recreated a model where I took one of the group's ideas and we did a modelled writing, and we were really, really, really thinking, because Naughty Bus came to our school, we were thinking of these particular types of parts in our writing. If we think about the text type features, which is there, the key text features, this is the key features that we identified, and they were the ones that we carefully prepared in that first phase of the fragments. And now we're in the part writing the paragraph, we'd already put sowed the seeds for the words for went, through our zoomed and things like that. We thought of active verbs, and we added in said, because we wanted to add that in. We had already started to think about some of the great time connectors when we did and adverb sentence starters when we did the character description, but we were really bringing this together. And we did a modelled write of that, and then they got to then write a paragraph about their story. And because they'd had this lived experience and they'd acted it out, they'd done the rehearsal, the outputs were really, really, really fun. So they were then drafting and revising that. This is where then that kind of revise and editing stage was really, really important. And I would say that if I was looking back at that, I don't think I was skilled enough at that stage to really tease it out. I saw them as part and parcel, and I think my teaching practice as I went through my career started to tease these two things out. So really revising and editing. So they did that at that text level, and I did mark them. They had opportunities to have feedback, etc., etc. Another good case example in the case study in the KS2 Guidance Report around drafting, revising, editing is the Charles Dickens Primary School example, where they use the scaffolded support to produce a written piece from a plan, which is what we'd done. We'd had that visual, they were writing a written piece, support the process for revising the text, and then going through to feedback. So if you are interested in kind of teasing that out a bit more, there is a nice case study from Charles Dickens School in the guidance report. So at this stage then, when we'd had all of these groups across the classroom having written their own part of an adventure, their own little adventure, we then physically pulled the parts together and made it into a big story on our wall. So we made a big giant red bus on our wall, and the different parts. So this is one group's mini adventure, one group's mini adventure, one group, all the way through until Naughty Bus went back to his start point. So we mirrored the original story, but made it our own. And they loved it. We actually then had to make it into a visual book, and it stayed into our reading corner for the whole year. It was a big book, and we had it all in, and everyone could see their part of the story creating this big narrative, and it was a real celebration. And this is what it looked like, the story. One day, this to be fair, I did write the starter and the end of the story. We picked out fragments of the different parts of the story so it could create a narrative. You can see different groups had different levels of outputs, just naturally because of what they did. This was one group because he went into Mrs. Goodman's office and then wreaked havoc, and then this was another group. So we can see how that kind of builds up. What we then did from that point, so we did the plan, draft, revise, edit, publish of this part, and they were really, really proud. And this was the published part where we actually created our own book in the classroom. So I've shown you the fragments, I've shown you the parts, and they were now thinking about how you sequence mini adventures into a multi-part adventure. And this is the kind of that choice was really, really powerful for us. Then when we looked at the next part, the third part of our story then was about them planning their own Naughty Bus story. So what we did is, depending on the group, some of them had two middles, or they could go up to 3 middles or a 4 middle, depending on how many multi-part adventures they wanted. And I'd say who chose to do the number of parts was variable. It wasn't like all of the pupils who were my kind of high prioritaiers, who were more confident writing, all had multi-parts. Some of them just did 2 parts, but did those 2 parts really, really well. So I had no presupposition as to who was what, where, when. For some of the pupils, it was really, really powerful that they didn't just write down what it was and then planned it. They physically needed to sequence the photos out in front of them and talk through, and we would scribe for them their ideas and their language so they could use that as their planning tool. So again, we're at that text level now, using the same process: plan, draft, revise, edit, publish. So then they use that, including our learning objectives, to then construct at text level. And because they'd lived part of it through that kind of part of the story, they'd had that pre-micro teach, small cycles of micro teaching in the fragments, their confidence had built up massively. And it was really, really exciting. Some of the pupils, even at the writing stage, needed the further scaffolding. So we actually gave them small copies of their photographs, and they got to choose then, and they could glue it in the margin. So as they were writing each part of the micro adventure, they had a visual prompt in their margin, and they would glue the next one in when they'd finished one paragraph. And it was just a simple visual way of chunking it down so that every pupil could accomplish it. And it was really, really, really fun. And the end outputs were variable because we had variable start points, but the quality of their writing over that 3-stage teaching sequence, recycling constantly the plan, draft, revise, edit, publish, thinking about the frequency with which, and I think that was my biggest learning curve. If I want the pupils to get better at writing, I have to give them really achievable multiple opportunities to write, refine, and build. And that was the biggest thing that I learned from these pupils. They taught me so much about building confidence in writing. So I hope you've enjoyed the story, and I hope at the very least I've enthralled you into actually getting your own copy of Naughty Bus. And hopefully you can kind of see there that we really thought about the simple view of writing and how demanding writing is, and we really created a teaching sequence over 6 weeks where we accomplished something really, really special. So I hope that this evidence in action kind of narrative that we've shared, this thinking through what a lived experience of teaching has inspired you to really think about how you make the challenge of writing really accessible for all learners, and really teaching this writing process so that it becomes a natural part of their behaviours as authors, because we want to develop their authorship. So thank you for sharing with us, thank you for being with us, and we hope we've given you some pause for thought. If you then want to delve into this a bit further, don't hesitate to go through. The resources are available on the EF website, freely available for schools, and enjoy.